We can think of these like recipes. All right, so the first recipe is going to be the marching. All right. Now, in order to do this, we need to understand a couple of basic techniques, and we've seen a few of these earlier on in the previous presentation. For one thing, you've got your 6 main tools up here. We're going to be focusing on 3 of them. The selection tool lets you say what part of the audio you want to affect. So it's pretty straightforward. I want to get rid of this initial chunk because it's just me turning on the mic before we were actually doing anything. So for that, delete, deletes. I can alternately do things like, all right, I'm going to Option Z to undo. All right. I can also do things like go to the Remove Audio menu and do a cut or a split delete. Or a split delete, remember how when I deleted it moved everything over? A split delete keeps everything in place and just creates new tracks on either side of the thing that you deleted. All right? So depending on what your need is, knowing both of those tools can be really, really helpful. All right? Then you've got the time shift tool. The time shift tool lets me drag things around. I can drag things to other tracks. I can move tracks around relative to one another. So we're going to get a lot of mileage out of this. The third one we're going to use is called the envelope tool. Envelope controls volume. So if I choose this, see how the interface changes a little bit? And now I've got these little bars here. All right, watch. If I grab one of these bars, this is changing the volume of the track. And there's a couple of really cool things about this tool. One is that unlike almost everything Audacity does, this is called a non-destructive change. Audacity normally does what we call destructive changes, which means if I apply an effect to this, or I delete a chunk of audio or something like that, that change is done. It is permanent. I would have to reload the original file and start again if I decided I made a mistake. Now, one of the reasons that Reaper is really cool and is a good choice for some things is, is that when you apply effects in Reaper, like if you add reverb or a fade or something like that in Reaper, they're non-destructive. It's a layer that sits on top of the original file, and you can remove that layer, and it's as though you never made the change. Alicia?
Back your stuff up.
Okay, yes. Back your stuff up. What I do is I created those original files, and I am not ever going to overwrite those files until I am absolutely certain that I am done with them, right? And I always, especially when I'm working on second shift, we always keep the raw recordings, and I can't tell you how many times I screwed up a recording, and because I'm working on Audacity and doing destructive changes, I needed to go back to that original raw recording and plunk it on top of what I was doing and start over. All right? Open opens an Audacity project. Import pulls in an MP3 or a WAV or something like that. Yeah. Import will create a new track with a specific external file.
And the Audacity files are, what's the file extension?
Audacity uses a weird way of storing files. It actually creates 2 things. It creates a file called, yourprojectname.aup. And then, well, actually, I can show you in here. So here I've created a couple of things. It creates this .aup file. And notice this is 8 kilobytes. This is tiny. It also has this same name _ data directory. And that's what contains, it basically chops your project up into these little teeny .au files. And this is where the actual content is. So I'm really glad you mentioned that, because there's been times when I've been collaborating with volunteer editors and someone sends me a project by attaching the .aup file to an email, and that gets you nothing. That is an XML file that describes what to do with the data in the data directory. Okay? Yeah?
If collaborating with other people, for example, as I said, when we were running a podcast with multiple people on Skype, even sending all of this, all the AUP files, yes, that's workable, but if people are working on other projects, there's a tool called export. Export has the power, as I can show you. Export each one of these tracks
There's export, and then there's also export multiple. And export multiple is your friend. This will let me say, I want to export every track in this project as its own file of the specified type. And I can tell it MP3s or waves or something like that. So if I need to share with somebody, it's sometimes actually easier to just export each track as a wave and zip those up. Or you can go up here, save compressed copy of project. That will put the entire project into a .zip file. But it's going to be huge.
We use Dropbox.
Yeah, Dropbox is different.
Well, though I will say one thing, I don't know if this is still the case, but I did a collaborative project using Audacity on Dropbox, and because Audacity uses so many tiny files, we had a couple of situations where maybe we were both trying to use it at the same time or something, but we ended up corrupting the files in the data directory. So if you're using Dropbox, I would say definitely use this compressed copy feature. Save the zip, and when you need to make a change, copy it to your hard drive, work on it, copy it back, and make sure only one person is working at a time.
Yeah, we have a rule that it's just a storage location and you pull them in one.
Yeah, that's probably fine. Yeah.
There were a couple of occasions on second shift when I was doing individual scenes that Brad, and I was working with Audition and Logic, Brad working with Audacity, and he would use the export multiple feature just to render the each individual track so that I didn't have to worry about any of the file type issues with Audacity. I just took the WAV files and plopped them into my own software.
Yeah.
And
So okay, getting back to the envelope tool. Another cool thing about the envelope tool, see when I clicked here, you might not be able to see, it created this tiny little white dot. See how I can drag that around? All right. If I click somewhere else, it creates another tiny little white dot. And now they can work independently. So if I want this to, say, fade in slowly, remember how a couple people picked up on the fact that my marching effect was fading in over time? Let this be a lesson to always solo the project, the task you're working on. And probably want that to be a little bit faster, so there you go.
Can you show us how you use the docs?
Sure. Basically just switch to the envelope tool, click anywhere you want, it creates a dot, and that dot becomes a drag point that you can move around. Ah, excellent question. This is one of those things real easy once you learn it, but it's totally unintuitive. The way you get rid of the dot is you get rid of the dot. Click it, drag it off the screen. Yep, that's how you get rid of a dot. You grab it and you toss it away. Once it leaves the track, Audacity figures out that you want to get rid of it. Okay? All right. So those are the three tools that we're going to be dealing with. On the handout that I provided, there's a link to the manual for Audacity and a tip. If you go to the manual main page and you scroll down, there will be a screenshot of the main Audacity screen. And if you click anywhere on that screenshot, it will take you to the documentation for that tool or that menu. All right? So I'm not going to go into the tools that aren't directly relevant to what I'm talking about, but you can learn about the rest of it just by taking it from there yourself. All right? Okay, so we've now got this this chopping sound. Now, this whole thing started when my girlfriend was chopping pumpkin seeds, and I went, hey, that sounds a little bit like people marching. I now know what I'm doing for my presentation. But it doesn't really sound convincing yet. And this is where we get to a really important principle of sound design, which is that it's not actually that hard to trick the mind when you're dealing with sounds out of context. You would not believe some of the bizarre things that we used for sound effects on second shift. In the first episode, there's a scene that takes place in a kitchen, and they're supposed to be, bacon frying and stuff like that. And we were trying to make sound effects for this scene, and we're like, we don't have any bacon. But we want to have sounds, and we didn't know. There's lots of places online you can go to get these effects nowadays. We didn't know about them; they didn't exist at the time. We took a wet paper towel and threw it into a frying pan, and that was the sound of bacon frying for that episode. So a little imagination will get you a long way. There's also situations where the actual sound of something is not what you want. If you know, you've probably heard about like those ads for cereal where they've got the cereal sitting in that bowl of milk, and it's not actually milk, they use glue, right? Because glue looks more like milk than milk does. Same principle applies to audio theater. A friend of mine was talking to me a while ago about wanting to create a scene where somebody was throwing small pebbles at somebody else. And he made this offhand comment about, okay, so getting the sound of somebody being pelted with pebbles, that's gonna be hard. And I was like, no, that's actually I got to think about that for a second, because what you absolutely do not want is the sound of a pebble hitting someone. Because I mean, what does that sound like? That doesn't sound like anything. That's certainly not going to make somebody who's listening to that sound out of context go, that sounds like a pebble hitting someone. You really want some completely unrealistic sound, like the sound of the pebble being thrown. Pebbles don't actually make sound when they're being thrown, but that's going to be more evocative than the sound of, right? And the sound of something just thudding someone in the chest. So, okay, we're going to turn pumpkin seeds into people marching. You guys tell me, listening to this, what do we need to do to make this sound like people marching? What does this share with people marching? How does it differ? Okay, we might want to slow it down a little bit. All right, too crunchy. Now that's a very good description. What does crunchy mean? Think of it in sound terms. What makes a sound crunchy? Yes, specifically, it's got this sort of high end on it that doesn't sound like boots, right? It's got that low end, and it's got just enough variation that it sounds like a bunch of things hitting the ground, but it doesn't sound like boots yet. So, okay, we might slow it down a little bit. We also want to chop that top range of the frequencies off and boost the bass end, right? And so this is one of the places where Audacity really shines, the ability to almost literally sculpt the sound that you're working with. There's a couple other things we can do. When you want to make a sound big, the biggest things you can do is fiddle with the pitches, boost the bass, boost the volume, and add more of it, layer it. So let's start with the layering. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by turning this stereo track into a mono track, just to make it a little easier to deal with. You'll notice that the stereo, the left and right tracks here are not radically different, so we're not going to lose much by chunking this down to a mono. So we can do that by going to tracks, stereo track to mono. All right, now I've got just this one track. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Command-Shift on a PC. This would be Control-Shift-N twice. That's going to create two new mono tracks. All right? I'm going to drag these up to the top. All right? And actually, while I'm at it, I'm going to shift-click both of these tracks. So see how they're both selected now when I shift-click them? And I'm just going to go ahead and turn those mono as well. All right, so now my screen's a little bit less cluttered, got a little bit more room. In fact, another neat trick, if you go to View, Fit Vertically, everything just resizes to fit all of your tracks. All right, so I don't need more than maybe 10 seconds of this marching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my cursor here at the 10-second mark, and I'm going to split this track. I'm going to turn this one track into two, all right, or this one chunk of sound into two. Now I can do that by going to, and I've actually forgotten where it is on the menu because I don't use the menu for this anymore. But yeah, there we go. Clip boundaries split, or Command-I. All right. So I'm going to do Command-I, and see this is now a separate track, and I can use my time shift tool to drag it down onto another track and add it to the solo set. Then in the same place, I'm going to grab one of these guys. I'm going to put another split here. Oh, actually, I need to go back to the select tool. I would encourage you, somewhat hypocritically, I would encourage you to learn the hotkeys for these. There are the different function keys switch to each of these. I keep telling myself I should learn them because it will really make this sort of thing a lot less tedious, but I keep not doing that. Doesn't mean it's not a good idea, though. All right, so now let's see what just that did. Okay, now we've got a good solid legion of pumpkin seeds to work with, right? Now, if we listen, there is a bit of a problem because, listen long enough, we start getting out of sync, right? Oh, and actually, here, listen to this. Notice, by the way, if I click up here on the timeline, it plays from that point. Hear that? So we also got a little bit of an artifact of the knife scraping the cutting board, which is going to kind of destroy our illusion here. So fortunately, and I probably should have done this before, but now I need to figure out which of those tracks has the artifact.
You can see it. It's in the middle track, right there.
All right.
It's a little bit sloppy.
Hey, very good. Bravo. All right, so I'm going to go here and zoom in on this bit. And so if I drag a chunk on the timeline, it'll just play that chunk. Okay, that's not my scrape. Where's my scrape at? There's my scrape. So now this gets a little bit tricky. I'm going to do a command L, which will silence this. Now, if this were the only track I was working with, this would be very bad. I see you shaking your head. Why? Why is this a bad idea?
Sometimes you have this nice background noise and then suddenly there's this dead silence.
There's always going to be background noise, and this by itself is going to sound weird. All right? If it's a little bit less apparent than I wanted it to be on the speakers, but on headphones, it would be a glaring silence. I can get away with a little bit more on account of the fact that I'm layering, because there's going to be that background noise on two other tracks. And so this chunk, I'm playing a little bit fast and loose, but you can get away with it. You can get away with it here. All right? If I couldn't do this, then I could grab the background track from another track and paste it over this. I could just get rid of an entire chop, right? There are things that I could do. For now, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I can do this the easy way. All right, now that I'm zoomed in a little bit, this is also a good time to fix some of my sync issues. So I can see these two start out pretty well synced. This one isn't, so I'm going to go to time shift. And I'll drag this so that they get mostly in sync. Okay, we get out of sync here. So since this is a little bit ahead, just grab a chunk and hit delete. And just use that way to back it up. All right, this avoids creating any silence, any unnecessary silence. All right. Okay. Then the same deal, these guys over here are getting a little bit ahead. And we got another artifact here. So this is a little bit trickier. I think for this one, I'm just going to get rid of this whole chunk here. Let's pull this back. So once I've got something selected, if I put my cursor right on the edge, notice it gives me this pointer. That lets me tweak the selection so I can fine-tune the size of the selection. You can also do shift and the left and right arrow keys. And let's do the same thing here. Okay. All right. And so I could spend a long time doing this. You know, on cooking shows, the person will say, and now we're going to put this in the oven for 20 minutes, and then it fades out and fades back in. We're going to do that. As I am going to get rid of this and go to, that was wrong. Go to this step2.aup. where I have already done all of the tweaking. So we've got everything. All right, all our artifacts have been removed. We've layered 3 deep. We've got something that we can work with. We've got a nice, solid 8-second sample. All right? Okay, so now I want to make my life a little bit easier because for everything I'm going to do from here on in, all the changes I'm going to make, I essentially want to treat these as one track, right? So on the Tracks menu, there's an option Mix and Render. This does the opposite of that splitting stuff we were looking at earlier, and it takes all the selected tracks and turns them into one new track. So here is our single track with our triple layered legion of pumpkin seeds. All right? Okay, so now we've got a couple other things we wanted to do. We were talking about slowing it down a little bit, and we were talking about tweaking the frequencies involved to get rid of that crunchiness that was described. The easy one is changing the speed. Notice on the effect menu, there are 3 options: change pitch, change speed, and change tempo. All right? Everybody understand what pitch and tempo means, right? Pitch is, well, is it higher pitched or lower pitched? And typically, if you speed something up, it increases the pitch, right? If you slow something down, it decreases the pitch. Tempo is the speed, right? Change pitch lets me change the pitch without altering the tempo. Change tempo lets me change the tempo without altering the pitch. Change speed changes both at once. All right? So if I wanted to say, slow this down 5%. Okay, there's a little bit more deliberate. We also get a little bit lower, right? So, and we also get another ½ second of marching out of the deal. All right? Okay. So here's where we get to the really cool part. And here's where we get to, again, this is where Audacity really, really shines as a tool. We want to eliminate that crunchiness. And what that means is we want to chop the top end of the spectrum off and boost the base end of the spectrum, right? So on the effect menu again, well, actually, before we do that, let's look at what we're changing. All right, so I've got my marching selected. If you go to the Analyze menu, there's this tool called Plot Spectrum. All right, this shows me all of the frequencies present in this sample and how loud they are relative to one another. And we can see there's a little bit of a spike on the bass end. You know, there's a bit more bass than treble, but when we get up into the higher range, and by the way, for those of you who do music, notice down here where my cursor is, it actually tells me the note and octave that this is relative to, if that's helpful to you. All right? So you can see my pumpkin seed army spans from octave 2 to octave 10. So I have an 8-octave spread across this pumpkin seed army. So what I want to do is I want to kill a chunk of this and make the top end bigger. So around the 1,000 hertz bit, we want to, particularly when we get up around here, we want to I want to pull this off. So, okay.
Is that showing you time? Also, like that's the...
No, this is not time. This is for each range, like the low frequencies, this is effectively how loud they are. All right? So, I'm going to go in my selection, and I'm going to go to the Equalization tool. Oh, sorry about that. And I'm going to go to the Equalization tool. All right, so we start out with this very flat bar, all right? And what I want to do is, let's say that I want to, at around the, well, actually, we need to drag this out a little bit to actually be able to see the whole spectrum, because remember, the frequency analysis thing, where did it go? Okay, apparently I can't get to it. Here we go. All right, doesn't want to show it to me. But the frequency analysis went all the way up to the 20,000 range. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's say at about right in the middle, I'm going to drag this down so that by the time we get to this range, we're just going to cut the entire top end off of this sound, all right? And let's see how that sounds. Okay. Now that's actually a little bit more than we probably want. So let's try making this a little bit more of a gradual curve. Yeah. Well, that's actually something that I wanted to show you. I was going to show this later, but I can actually show it now. If you want to have a door between your listener and the sound, what does a door do? Well, depending on the type of material, it cuts off frequencies, typically the high frequencies first. So you can also do this with a tool called a low-pass filter. But if I give this a nice steep cutoff and only keep the low end, now I've got people marching on the other side of a thick concrete wall, right? Now, that's not actually what I want, so I'm going to be a little more generous with my curve here. Let's see how this sounds. There we go. That's still got a little bit of choppiness, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the line here, which will give me a new drag point, so I can make it look a little bit more like this. Okay, that's starting to look good. Okay. And, welcome to the exciting world of audio theater production, because you're going to do a lot of this. Try it, listen again. This is going to be yes, this is going to make a destructive change.
At what point it will be destructive?
When I click OK. Yeah, until I click OK, if I click cancel, my sound is not changed. But I do want to make sure I get this right, because if I don't, then I'm going to have to go back to whatever I saved last. Well, what I can do is here, I'm going to click OK. That will apply the change. Now I'm going to immediately undo it. And now I will copy it, create a new track, paste it. So, okay, now we'll be able to compare. All right? And I'm not sure that what I want is the levels I have are what I want, but I would tweak this and get it a little bit more right. But let me show you. So I applied the equalization and then I undid it. Notice at the top of the effect menu, once you've done something, Command R just redoes that. So I can redo the exact equalization that I just did. All right? Now notice that since I took out a bunch of sound, it's now much softer, right? So I'm going to compensate for that and go to Effect, Amplify. And Amplify calculates the exact maximum amount you can amplify this without maxing out the waveform. So, okay, here's our original. And here's what we've turned it into. Okay? And that's actually, you hear how that sounds kind of muted? That's because I haven't quite gotten the right the right graph for that equalizer. For the sake of time, actually, you know what? I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I'm going to try one more time to get this exactly right. But then we'll move on, and you can take it as an exercise for the reader to get this exactly right. But I want a little bit more of the top end than I have. That sounds a bit better.
So it actually kept the graph, it didn't change it?
Yes. Every time, all of these effects save the last settings you used. Yeah.